My name is Emma Reyes. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a senior fraud and compliance analyst at a financial firm in Chicago. My entire career is built on one skill: finding the tiny inconsistency that someone hoped would slip past unnoticed, the misaligned decimal, the invoice that doesn't match the vendor, the number that was quietly changed after the fact. I never thought I'd use that skill on my own father. He walked into my apartment on a rainy Tuesday night, set a printed bill on my kitchen counter, and tapped it twice with his index finger like he was closing a business deal. $22,000. Your brother's tuition, his dorm fees, a new laptop, and a meal plan, he said. You're the oldest, Emma. This is your responsibility now. There was no question in his voice. No request. Just an order wrapped in the language of family duty. I looked at the page. Then I looked at him. And for the first time in my life, I said no. He told me selfishness always comes with a price. Then he left without saying goodbye. 3 days later, I overheard my parents planning something in their dining room, a plan that involved Christmas, an audience, and my inability to say no in front of people I loved. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea that the woman they raised to be quiet and agreeable had spent 12 years learning how to read a lie hidden inside a spreadsheet. By the time dessert was served on Christmas Day, their plan wasn't just going to fail, it was going to expose exactly where that $22,000 was actually supposed to go. This is the story of how it happened. In my family, everyone had a role. My father, Richard, made the declarations. My mother, Diane, softened them into something that sounded like love. My younger brother, Ryan, simply waited to receive whatever the two of them decided he was owed. I had spent years telling myself this arrangement was just how our family worked, a little old-fashioned, maybe, but not something worth fighting. I was the responsible one, the one who fixed things, the one who didn't complain. That identity had a cost, and I'd been paying it quietly for over a decade. When Richard dropped that bill on my counter, something in me finally refused to bend. $22,000 for Ryan's tuition, dorm, laptop, and meal plan. He didn't ask if I could afford it. He didn't ask if I wanted to help. He informed me, the way you'd inform an employee of a new deadline. I had already covered my parents' supplemental insurance premiums more times than I could count. I had bailed out emergency home repairs, unexpected medical copays, a temporary gap in their mortgage payment that somehow became permanent. This wasn't new territory for me. What was new was the size of the number, and the tone in his voice that told me refusal was not actually an option he was offering. I pushed the paper back across the counter. Find someone else, I said. His face tightened in a way I recognized from childhood, the look that usually preceded a lecture about gratitude, sacrifice, and everything I supposedly owed this family for existing. Selfish choices have consequences, he said, and walked out without another word. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I regretted saying no, I didn't, but because something about the whole exchange felt staged, rehearsed, like he already had a plan for what came next. I was right. 3 days later, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off a box of old holiday decorations I'd been storing in my closet. I let myself in through the side door, the way I always had, and I was halfway to the living room when I heard my father's voice coming from behind the half-closed dining room door. Relax, he was saying. We'll corner her at Christmas dinner. She won't say no in front of everyone. My mother laughed, an easy, confident laugh, like this was simply good strategy, nothing more. Then Ryan said something I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was unmistakable. Amused. Complicit. I stood in that hallway for a long moment, holding a box of ornaments, listening to my own family plan an ambush against me using an audience of people who loved us as the weapon. I didn't walk in. I didn't confront them. I set the box down quietly by the stairs and left the way I came. They believed Christmas would make me easier to control. They had no idea that I had spent my entire adult career learning how to follow money, document lies, and wait patiently until people committed fully to their version of events, because that's always the moment they make their first real mistake. I went home that night and did something I hadn't let myself do earlier. I actually looked at the bill. Not as a daughter reading a request from her father. As an analyst reading a document from a stranger. The university logo was slightly blurred, like it had been copied from a screenshot rather than an official source. The tuition line used a different font from the housing line, a small detail, but a telling one. Documents assembled at different times rarely matched perfectly. There was a premium meal plan listed that, as far as I could find on the school's public website, didn't actually exist as an option. And the laptop charge, nearly $3,000, had no vendor, no model number, no tax listed. Just a flat, round figure. At the bottom, one line stated that payment was due before Christmas. I checked the university's public academic calendar. The actual payment deadline for the spring semester was in January. None of these details alone proved anything, but together they told a very clear story. Someone had built this document to create urgency, not to reflect reality. The next morning, I called my cousin Marcus Bennett, Ryan's closest friend since childhood, and someone who had helped him move into his dorm back in the fall. Marcus had once mentioned, almost in passing, that Ryan had received a merit scholarship. I kept my question simple. Has Ryan ever shown you his actual student account balance? There was a pause. Why? My dad handed me a bill for $22,000 and told me it's mine to pay. Marcus exhaled slowly. Emma, Ryan told me a few weeks ago that what he still owed was around $7,000. That's after the scholarship. That number lined up almost exactly with what I'd estimated from the public tuition rates. I asked if he had anything in writing. He hesitated. Not, I think, because he wanted to protect a lie, but because he was tired of being pulled into Ryan's financial drama. Eventually, he forwarded me a screenshot Ryan had sent him weeks earlier while venting about money. The student portal showed a balance of $7,180. It also showed a merit scholarship applied and a separate payment listed under something called the Whitfield Family Education Trust. That name stopped me cold. My grandmother had set up that trust years ago, specifically to help her grandchildren with education costs. When I was applying to college, my father had told me the fund was too small to help right now and that it needed to be preserved for real emergencies. I believed him. I worked night shifts, took out loans, and graduated telling myself I had protected the family from financial hardship. If the trust was now actively paying for Ryan's education, why was I being asked for $22,000? I called my Aunt Patricia, my father's older sister, and the one person in our family who had never been afraid to challenge him and mean it. She was the co-supervisor of the education trust, though my father handled the day-to-day statements. Do you know what the trust actually paid toward Ryan's school this year? I asked her. Her silence was different from Marcus's. It wasn't hesitation. It was the sound of someone mentally opening a drawer they hadn't checked in a while. It should have covered about $14,000, she finally said. Richard told me the transfer went through back in August. Marcus has a screenshot showing Ryan still owes about $7,000. Dad's asking me for $22,000. That doesn't add up, Patricia said slowly. Let me request the latest statement from the bank. But Emma, don't accuse anyone until we actually know where the money went. I agreed. It was good advice, and it was exactly the kind of discipline I would have given a client in my own job. After we hung up, I went back to the bill one more time, this time holding it up to the light. There was a faint gray rectangle behind the total figure, a shape that suggested something had been pasted over an original number. When I zoomed in on a scanned copy, I could just make out the curve of what looked like a 6, buried underneath the 2. That evening, Ryan called me. His voice was cheerful, almost too cheerful, like he'd rehearsed it. Dad said you're stressed about the tuition thing, he said. Look, I get it, 22 grand sounds like a lot. But it would really take the pressure off everyone. Can you just send me the official invoice from your student portal? I can't access it right now, he said quickly. Too quickly. You sent Marcus a screenshot yesterday. The cheerfulness disappeared instantly. Why are you talking to Marcus about me? Because the numbers don't match, Ryan. He accused me of treating him like a criminal. I told him I was treating a document like a document, nothing personal, just facts. Then I asked him directly, what was the extra $15,000 actually for? He didn't answer. Instead, he said something about how Christmas was supposed to be about family, and hung up. By the end of that day, I understood two things clearly. Ryan knew the bill was false. And my parents were counting on the dinner table to accomplish what the document alone couldn't. They believed an audience would make me obedient. I decided an audience would make the truth impossible to bury. 2 days later, Patricia called while I was leaving work. She had a transaction summary, not the full statement yet, but enough to tell a story far worse than a simple exaggerated bill. The trust had started the year with just under $40,000. $14,000 had gone, exactly as expected, to Ryan's university in August. 6 weeks after that, my father had authorized 2 separate withdrawals, both labeled educational reimbursement. One was $9,200. The other was $8,100. Neither had gone anywhere near the university. He told me he was reimbursing costs he'd already personally covered. Patricia said, her voice tight with something between anger and shame. I trusted him because he was the acting trustee. I didn't ask for receipts. That wasn't her failure alone. My father had built an entire lifetime of authority on the assumption that questioning him was disrespectful. Even Patricia, the one person who had never fully backed down from him, had learned, like the rest of us, to choose peace until peace became too expensive to afford. I asked her not to say anything yet. Before I exposed anything publicly, I wanted to give my father one private opportunity to make it right. Not because he deserved the benefit of the doubt, but because I needed to know, once and for all, whether he was capable of choosing honesty when no audience was forcing his hand. I drove to my parents' house that Saturday. I found my father in the garage, polishing the hood of a brand new SUV, one he told the family was necessary because the old one had become unreliable. The temporary registration sticker was still taped inside the windshield. "We need to talk about Ryan's bill," I said. He didn't even look up. "I thought we settled that." "You gave me an order." "That's not the same as settling something. You always turn family matters into negotiations. And you always turn your decisions into my obligations." His jaw tightened. I set a printed copy of Ryan's real account balance on the hood between us. "He owes $7,180, I said. "The trust already paid $14,000. Where did the rest of the $22,000 demand come from?" For a fraction of a second, his eyes flicked toward the SUV parked 3 feet away. It was such a small movement, but it told me more than anything he said afterward. He gave me every excuse available. "College costs change constantly," he said. Ryan needed a financial cushion. A good sister would care more about reducing her brother's stress than interrogating him over paperwork. When none of that landed, he reached for the oldest tool in our family's collection. "After everything your mother and I sacrificed for you," he said, "this is how you repay us?" That sentence pulled me backward 17 years, to a memory I hadn't let myself fully examine in a long time. I was 16, standing in that same garage, holding an envelope from a statewide academic competition. I had won $1,700. My father congratulated me for exactly as long as it took him to explain that Ryan needed new equipment for a summer sports program and that I should think of my winnings as a temporary family loan. I handed the check over. No one ever mentioned paying it back. A year later, when I needed money for college application fees, I picked up extra shifts at a grocery store while my parents told relatives how independently minded I was. I used to think that memory made me proud of my self-reliance. Standing in that garage as an adult, it looked like something else entirely. The first entry in a ledger I had refused to ever total up. "You didn't raise me to become your emergency fund," I told him. He stepped closer, his voice dropping into a warning. "Be careful, Emma. Success has made you arrogant." "No," I said. "Success made me capable of recognizing a false invoice when I see one." Something shifted in his expression. He had clearly expected resistance. He hadn't expected evidence. I gave him the offer I'd come to make. "Tell me the truth now. Cancel whatever Christmas plan he thought I didn't know about. Explain, honestly, where the trust money had actually gone. And I would let the family handle it privately, without a public reckoning." He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. A cold, practiced smile. "There is no plan," he said. "You're imagining enemies because you can't handle being asked to contribute." That's when the garage door opened behind me, and Ryan walked in carrying shopping bags from an electronics store. He froze when he saw the real balance sheet sitting on the hood of the SUV. "What is this?" he asked. "You tell me," I said. "Why does Dad need $22,000 when your actual balance is 7? Ryan glanced at our father before answering, an instinctive, telling look that confirmed exactly how aligned the two of them already were. "The rest is for next semester," he said. "The document says current tuition, dorm, laptop, meal plan." Then Dad described it wrong. My father seized the opening immediately. "Exactly. It was an estimate. You're turning a wording issue into a scandal." I nodded toward the shopping bag still hanging from Ryan's hand. "Is the $3,000 laptop in there?" He pulled the bags behind his leg. "That's none of your business." "It became my business the moment you put it on my bill." My mother appeared in the doorway then, asking why I was ruining the weekend. Notice what she didn't ask. She never once asked whether the bill itself was real. She only asked why I wouldn't simply let it go. That distinction ended whatever doubt I still had about her role in all of this. I gathered the papers off the hood. "You have until Christmas morning to tell the family the truth yourselves." My father laughed. "And if we don't, then I will." He told me no one would ever believe I'd been mistreated after everything they'd supposedly done for me. I walked past him without another word. At the end of the driveway, Ryan called out, warning me not to embarrass him in front of the whole family. I turned around. "You're not afraid of being embarrassed," I said. "You're afraid of being accurately described." Neither of them had an answer for that. The week before Christmas, my family's group chat turned into a coordinated campaign, though I doubt any of them would have called it that. My mother posted old family photographs with captions about how grateful she was that her children always supported one another. My father shared an article about successful adults helping relatives through college. Ryan chimed in with a message about how terrified he was that financial pressure might derail his future. None of them mentioned my name directly. They didn't have to. Every sentence in that chat was aimed at me. Relatives responded the way relatives do, with hearts, prayers, encouraging emojis. Then my Uncle Frank wrote, "Ryan's lucky to have a big sister who can help him out." My mother reacted with a heart before I'd even had time to read the message twice. That was their entire strategy, condensed into a single exchange. Announce my generosity publicly before I had ever agreed to anything, so that refusing later would look like a betrayal of the whole family, not just a disagreement with two people. I didn't defend myself in the chat. I saved screenshots instead and sent one message of my own. "Looking forward to discussing the complete financial picture together at Christmas." The conversation went quiet for almost 3 hours. 2 days later, Patricia obtained the full, official trust records. We went through them together at my apartment, along with my coworker Laura Chen, a friend who specialized in internal fraud investigations. Laura wasn't the kind of friend who told you that you were right just because you were hurt. She challenged assumptions, separated fact from feeling, and asked exactly what each piece of evidence actually proved. The records confirmed everything. The trust had started the year with $39,900. $14,000 had gone legitimately to Ryan's university. The 2 later withdrawals, totaling $17,300, had gone into a joint account controlled by my parents. From there, $10,100 had been paid directly to the SUV dealership. Another $5,200 had gone to a contractor renovating their kitchen. The remainder had gone to Ryan. Ryan had used part of that money as a deposit on an off-campus apartment he didn't actually need, since his dorm contract already covered the full academic year. He'd also bought a high-end computer, not for coursework, but for a gaming and content creation setup he'd been showing off online for weeks. The fake bills suddenly made perfect sense. My father needed me to replace the money he'd quietly diverted before Patricia completed the annual accounting. If I paid the full $22,000, he could cover Ryan's actual balance, refill most of the trust, and preserve the illusion that nothing improper had ever happened. The SUV would stay in the driveway. The renovated kitchen would stay finished. Ryan would keep his apartment and his equipment. And I would absorb the entire cost and be praised for my generosity while doing it. "You need to decide what your actual goal is," Laura told me, laying the documents out by date across my kitchen table. An apology? Repayment? Distance? Public exposure? All of it, I said, then caught myself. No. I want the truth documented. Whatever happens after that can happen on its own. That distinction mattered more than I expected it to. Revenge driven purely by anger is easy to dismiss as cruelty. Accountability built on evidence is much harder to explain away. Patricia wanted to confront my father immediately, but I reminded her of his own plan. He had chosen Christmas specifically because he believed the family audience belonged to him, that it would work in his favor. If we moved too early, he'd simply rewrite the story, claim a misunderstanding, and tell everyone I'd attacked him over a minor bookkeeping error. We agreed to let him make his demand first, in front of everyone, exactly as he'd planned. I prepared 3 folders. The first held Ryan's real student balance, his scholarship documentation, and the altered bill side by side. The second held the trust statements, the bank transfers, and the receipts connected to the SUV, the renovation, and the apartment deposit. The third held something else entirely, a written letter ending every voluntary payment I had been quietly making on my parents' behalf. For nearly 4 years, I had covered their supplemental insurance premiums and property tax installments whenever my father claimed cash flow was tight. The total had averaged about $1,300 a month. I had never once called it support because my parents preferred the word help, as if the payments simply appeared occasionally instead of arriving on schedule like a second mortgage. I canceled the next round of transfers and printed the confirmations. I also wrote out a formal boundary. I would not fund Ryan's tuition. I would not replace money removed from the trust. I would not co-sign any loans. I would not respond to financial requests delivered secondhand through relatives. Any future contact with my parents would depend entirely on repayment and a direct, honest acknowledgement of what they had done. On Christmas Eve, Ryan called one more time. "You're really going to make Dad beg?" he asked. I asked for the truth, I said. "He's under pressure." "So am I." "You can afford $22,000. That doesn't make it mine to pay." His voice sharpened. "You care more about being right than about this family." I looked at the 3 folders sitting on my table. "No, Ryan. I care enough about this family to stop financing its lies." He told me I'd regret walking into Christmas dinner with that attitude. After we hung up, my mother texted that my father was planning a special family announcement before dessert and asked me, please, not to create a scene. I replied, "I won't create one. I'll bring the records for the scene you already planned." Christmas morning arrived with no confession, no canceled dinner, and no apology from anyone. At 4 in the afternoon, I packed the folders into my bag and drove to the house where I'd spent most of my life trying to earn a place I should have already had, unconditionally. This time, I wasn't going there to be accepted. I was going there to close the account. By the time I arrived, 11 relatives were already gathered in the living room. Coats covered the guest bed. Music played softly from a speaker near the tree. The dining table had been set with the kind of care that seems to assume presentation alone can guarantee peace. My father greeted me at the door with a hug that lasted just long enough to look affectionate from across the room. "There she is," he announced. "Our successful daughter." The word successful sounded less like praise and more like an appraisal of available funds. My mother kissed my cheek and whispered, "Please remember, today is about family." Ryan avoided my eyes entirely, talking loudly about his plans for next semester while wearing a new watch I didn't recognize. Patricia sat quietly near the window, calm and unreadable. Laura wasn't there. We'd agreed the evidence didn't need an outside advocate. The records would speak for themselves, and Patricia could confirm anything about the trust. Dinner began normally enough. My father carved the roast. My mother asked everyone to share one thing they were grateful for. Ryan described college as the hardest challenge of his life so far. When it was my turn, I said I was grateful for clear records and second chances. Patricia lowered her glass slightly to hide a brief smile. After the main course, my father tapped his spoon against his glass. "I want to talk about something important," he said. "Ryan has worked incredibly hard, but education is expensive. As parents, Diane and I have done everything we possibly can. Now it's time for the next generation to step up and carry some family responsibility. He reached under his chair and set the altered bill on the table directly in front of me. Emma has been blessed with a strong career, he continued. We're asking her to cover $22,000 for her brother's tuition, dorm, laptop, and meal plan. No one spoke. The silence was exactly what he'd been counting on. Every face at that table turned toward me, and the demand transformed instantly into a performance of generosity I was somehow expected to complete on cue. Uncle Frank nodded slowly. That's a lot, but family helps family. My mother leaned toward me. You don't have to decide this second, sweetheart. Just tell everyone you'll take care of it, and we can sort out the details later. There it was, the exact corner they had planned to trap me in. I set my napkin beside my plate. Before I answer, I said, I'd like Ryan to confirm the exact amount. Ryan shifted in his chair. It's roughly $22,000. Roughly. College costs change. What's the exact balance on your student account right now? This isn't an interrogation, my father snapped. It's a request for $22,000, I said. Exact numbers seem reasonable. Ryan looked around the table, searching for sympathy. About $7,000 right now. But there are future costs. I took the first folder from my bag and slid a copy of his account statement into the center of the table. The balance is $7,180, I said. Your merit scholarship has already been applied. Your dorm and meal plan are already included in that figure. You also received $14,000 from the Whitfield Family Education Trust. Uncle Frank picked up the page. My mother's hand froze around her glass. My father recovered quickly. The $22,000 covers next semester, and emergencies too. I placed the altered bill beside the authentic statement. Then why does this document describe the amount as current tuition, dorm, laptop, and meal plan? Why is a $7,000 balance covered over with a $22,000 total? And why does it claim payment is due before Christmas, when the university's actual deadline is in January? Ryan's face flushed red. I didn't make that document. Every eye at the table shifted to my father. He laughed once, sharply. I put together a family estimate. That's not a crime. I didn't call it a crime, I said. I called it false. My mother tried to step in. Emma, your father may have formatted it badly, but his intention was to protect Ryan. Must you humiliate him over a spreadsheet? I gave him a private chance to explain, I said. He chose this table instead. That's when Patricia spoke for the first time. Richard, she said evenly, where's the rest of the education trust? The entire room shifted. Until that moment, most of the relatives had treated this as a sibling disagreement over money. Patricia's question exposed a second, much deeper layer, and my father clearly understood it immediately. The trust is fine, he said. Then answer her. I replied. It started the year with $39,900. $14,000 went to Ryan's university. What happened to the rest? Patricia pressed. His eyes hardened. You had no authority to go digging into those records. I did, Patricia said calmly. I'm the co-supervisor. I requested them myself. My mother looked at her like she'd broken some unspoken family agreement. You went behind our backs. No, Patricia said. I reviewed an account I am legally responsible for. I opened the second folder. The first page showed the $9,200 withdrawal. The next showed the $8,100 withdrawal. Then came the transfers into my parents' joint account, and from there into the dealership and the contractor's invoice. Paper moved from hand to hand around that table, and with every page, my father's control over the room visibly weakened. The money never went to school, I said. $10,100 went to the dealership where Dad bought the new SUV. $5,200 went to the contractor renovating the kitchen. The rest went to Ryan for an apartment deposit he didn't need and equipment he didn't require for classes. Ryan pushed back from the table. Dad said he'd replace it. With my money, I said. With family money, my father snapped. Everything in this family is shared. Then why were the SUV and the kitchen shared with you, while the debt was assigned to me? He pointed a finger at me. Because you can afford it. You sit there with your salary and your apartment acting like you built everything on your own. I built it while you told me the education trust had nothing to spare for me, I said quietly. I worked nights. I took out loans. I handed over scholarship money as a teenager because you told me Ryan needed it more. For years, I paid your insurance premiums and property taxes because you told me you were struggling. And the entire time, you treated my stability as a resource you were entitled to allocate without ever asking. Patricia turned sharply toward him. You told Emma there was no money for her. My father said nothing. I kept going, my voice quieter now, but steady. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but her words stayed defensive. We were trying to keep everyone afloat, she said. You were trying to keep your lifestyle intact, I said. Uncle Frank was still staring at the dealership receipt. Richard, he said slowly. Did you use trust money for the SUV? My father folded his arms. I borrowed it. I intended to repay it. When? Patricia asked. He glanced at the altered bill and said nothing at all. He didn't need to. The trap he'd built had already collapsed. And the worst part, for him, wasn't that I had refused to pay. It was that everyone at that table could now see exactly what my payment had been designed to conceal. He tried, briefly, to regain control by standing up, insisting that private finances had no place at a Christmas dinner, accusing Patricia and me of turning a temporary loan into a public execution. But the authority in his voice no longer matched the room around him. The relatives weren't looking at me as the ungrateful daughter anymore. They were looking at him as the man who had presented a fabricated bill to hide money he'd already taken. My mother reached for the only escape she had left. Emma, even if mistakes were made, exposing this in front of everyone is cruel. I met her eyes. 3 days after I refused to pay, I heard you laugh when Dad said you'd corner me at Christmas because I wouldn't say no in front of everyone. You chose the audience, Mom. You just expected it to work in your favor. Her face went pale. Ryan stared down at his plate. Patricia asked him directly whether he'd known the $22,000 figure was false. He first claimed he hadn't fully understood how the trust worked, then admitted our father had told him to describe every possible future expense and round the number up. When Patricia asked about the apartment deposit, his story unraveled further. He confessed he'd wanted to move off campus with friends and had simply assumed I'd eventually pay for it, because I always do. Those 3 words landed harder than any accusation could have. They also, strangely, set something free in me. My generosity hadn't built gratitude in this family. It had built expectation. I opened the 3rd folder. As of this week, I said, I've ended the insurance and property tax payments I've been making for both of you. I won't pay Ryan's balance. I won't replace the trust money. I won't co-sign a loan. And I won't finance any future emergency created by dishonesty. Any future conversation about money needs to happen in writing. My father's anger finally broke through completely. You can't punish your mother because you're angry with me. I'm not punishing either of you, I said. I'm stopping payments that were always voluntary in the first place. We'll lose coverage, my mother said. You have income, a new SUV, and a renovated kitchen, I said. You'll need to decide what you can actually afford, the same way I've had to. Patricia then announced, calmly and without raising her voice, that my father was suspended from managing the education trust, effective immediately. She would send the complete records to the family attorney, require a full accounting, and demand repayment of every withdrawal that wasn't tied directly to education. Until that process concluded, she would personally approve only direct payments to accredited schools. No money would pass through my father or Ryan again. Ryan asked, quietly, whether the trust would still cover his remaining balance. The trust already supported you, Patricia told him. The money diverted for your apartment and your equipment counts as part of what you already received. The rest is your responsibility. His expression collapsed. Without the extra funding, he couldn't keep the off-campus apartment or the equipment he'd promised his friends he'd have. He'd need to stay in the dorm, return what he could, and find a job to cover what remained. None of those consequences threatened his education. They only threatened the image he'd tried to buy with other people's money. My father accused Patricia of trying to embarrass him. Uncle Frank pointed out that he just tried to embarrass me into paying for a fabricated debt. Another relative asked, almost offhandedly, whether this was the first time trust funds had been misused. The question moved slowly around the table, and my father's reputation, the thing he had always protected more carefully than any bank account, began to genuinely crack. My mother started crying. In our family, tears had always been enough to end a hard conversation, because everyone rushed to comfort her before anyone thought to ask what she'd actually done. This time, no one attacked her, but no one changed the subject either. My father followed me into the hallway as I collected my coat. "You've made your point," he said quietly. "Now give me 30 days. Pay the $22,000, and I'll return it once I sell something." "No. If the attorney sees everything, Patricia will destroy my name." "You withdrew the money," I said. "You created the bill. You planned the dinner. Your name is facing your own choices, not mine." He lowered his voice further. "I'm your father. That should make you feel safe with me. Not easier to use." Ryan appeared behind him and asked if I felt proud of myself. "I feel finished," I told him. I left before dessert. Through the front window, as I walked to my car, I could see the family still gathered around the documents. No one was shouting anymore. They were reading. That was the one consequence my parents had never planned for. They could survive my anger by calling it emotional. They could survive my refusal by calling it selfish. What they couldn't survive was an entire room of people quietly comparing their story to the actual records. I didn't ruin Christmas. I ended a performance that had been running for years. The formal accounting took 6 weeks. It confirmed that $17,300 had been removed from the education trust for expenses that never qualified as educational. With fees and missing documentation factored in, my father was required to repay $19,150. He sold the SUV, postponed the rest of the kitchen renovation, and used part of his savings to restore the account. Patricia became the trust's sole manager, and every future payment now goes directly to a school, never through a family member. Ryan returned his apartment deposit and sold some of the equipment he'd bought. He stayed in the dorm, picked up a part-time job at the campus library, and arranged a payment plan for the remaining $7,180 he actually owed. His life didn't fall apart. Only the fantasy that everyone else was responsible for maintaining it did. My parents lost something they clearly hadn't anticipated losing: access to me without accountability. I didn't visit for almost 3 months. I stopped answering messages that opened with guilt, money, or vague requests to just move on. My mother sent old photographs from happier years. My father sent short notes about how much pressure he'd been under. Neither message ever contained an actual apology, so neither ever received a response from me. The $1,300 a month I had been quietly sending them stayed in my own account. I used part of it to accelerate my student loan payments and put the rest toward a fund for a home of my own. The first month felt strange. Honestly, I kept half expecting an emergency phone call that would pull me right back into my old role. When it never came, I understood, fully for the first time, how much of my adult life had been quietly organized around preventing consequences for other adults. Ryan eventually wrote me an actual letter. He didn't blame our parents, his friends, or the cost of tuition. He admitted, in his own words, that he'd treated my success like it was family property and my boundaries like they were obstacles to work around. He apologized for helping create the false bill and for expecting a room full of relatives to pressure me into silence. I wrote back once. I told him forgiveness was possible, but financial support was not, and that trust, if it was ever going to be rebuilt, would happen through consistent choices over time, not through a single letter. Months later, we met for coffee. The conversation was a little awkward but honest, and that honesty was worth more to me than the easy closeness we used to pretend we had. My father never offered that same accountability. He still tells relatives that I overreacted over what he calls a private bookkeeping mix-up. But the records remain exactly where they are, and his version of events no longer controls the narrative the way it used to. He hasn't been trusted to manage shared family money since. My mother, for her part, stopped asking me to rescue them. For the first time in years, they've had to solve their own financial problems within the actual limits of their actual income. People sometimes imagine revenge as something loud and immediate, a dramatic act meant to make the person who hurt you suffer instantly. Mine was quieter than that. I refused a bill. I documented the truth. I stopped subsidizing people who had mistaken my love for permission. Then I simply stepped back and let their own decisions become expensive on their own terms. The $22,000 stayed exactly where it belonged, in my own account. More importantly, so did my voice. That Christmas taught me something I probably should have understood years earlier. Family loyalty, without consent, isn't loyalty at all. It's control. Helping the people you love can be one of the most generous things you ever do. But being pressured into financing someone else's dishonesty doesn't teach them gratitude. It just teaches them that manipulation works. Boundaries don't destroy healthy relationships. They simply reveal which relationships were quietly depending on you never having any. So here's the question I'd leave you with. If your own family placed a false obligation in front of you and called it love, would you pay it just to keep the peace? Or would you let the truth change the table forever?